The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jefferson Elementary, casting long shadows across Mrs. Patricia Holloway's fifth-grade classroom. She stood at her desk, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, reviewing the stack of essays with the methodical precision of someone who had been teaching for 32 years. 12-year-old Malik Johnson sat in the back corner, his dark eyes focused intently on the book in his hands, The Count of Monte Cristo. While his classmates whispered about weekend plans and video games, Malik was lost in the world of Dantes and his quest for justice. Hi, welcome back my beautiful family and friends. Today, I bring you a story about prejudice and deep-rooted bias. In this story, 12-year-old Malik Johnson, a brilliant young black boy, will show the world that being black does not mean being less. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Malik, Mrs. Holloway's voice cut through the morning chatter like ice. Perhaps you'd like to share with the class what's so fascinating about that advanced reading material? Her tone carried a subtle sneer that made several students glance up. Malik looked up, his intelligent eyes meeting hers steadily. It's about redemption, Mrs. Holloway. And how patience can be more powerful than revenge. A few students murmured appreciatively, but Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened. Well, maybe you should focus on age-appropriate material before attempting classics you might not fully comprehend. Malik's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, simply closing the book and placing it in his desk. Mrs. Holloway walked to her desk and picked up a specific essay from the stack, Malik's. She held it up, and even from the back of the room, the red marks were visible like wounds across the page. Class, let's discuss the importance of original work, she announced, her eyes fixed on Malik. Plagiarism is a serious offense, and some students seem to think they can submit work that's clearly beyond their capabilities. The classroom fell silent. Malik's best friend, Jenny Martinez, turned to stare at him in shock. Malik himself sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. Mrs. Holloway, Malik's voice was quiet but steady, I wrote that essay myself. I spent 3 days on it. Did you? She walked slowly toward his desk, the essay in her hand. Because this level of analysis, this vocabulary, these sophisticated arguments about social justice in literature, it seems rather advanced for someone from your background. The words hung in the air like poison. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Jenny Martinez raised her hand. Mrs. Holloway, I've seen Malik write. He's really smart. He helps me with. Miss Martinez, that's enough. Mrs. Holloway's voice was sharp. She reached Malik's desk and placed the essay in front of him. The grade at the top was a stark F, circled multiple times in red ink. Malik stared at the paper, his throat tight. He had poured his heart into that essay about how Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird related to modern social issues. He had researched for hours at the library, crafting each argument carefully. I want you to rewrite this, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice low enough that only Malik could hear clearly. Something more suitable to your level. Maybe a book report on Diary of a Wimpy Kid? The humiliation burned in Malik's chest, but before he could respond, the classroom door opened. Good morning, class. Principal Anderson, a tired-looking man in his 50s, stepped into the room with a woman Malik didn't recognize, an elegant black woman in a sharp navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Holloway, Principal Anderson continued, but I wanted to introduce everyone to our new district supervisor, Dr. Amara Johnson. She'll be observing some classes today. Malik's head snapped up, his eyes widening. Johnson, the woman's gaze swept across the classroom, professional and assessing, until her eyes found Malik in the back corner. For just a moment, her composed expression flickered with something, surprise, pride, love, before she restored her professional mask. Mrs. Holloway's face had gone pale. "Dr. Johnson," she stammered, "welcome to our classroom." Dr. Johnson stepped forward, her heels clicking authoritatively on the linoleum floor. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I'm particularly interested in observing how you assess student work and encourage academic excellence." Her eyes moved deliberately to the essay on Malik's desk, taking in the red ink and the F grade. Malik watched his mother's face, seeing the subtle tightening around her eyes that he knew meant trouble. "In fact," Dr. Johnson continued smoothly, "I'd love to see some examples of recent student work. Perhaps you could share how you evaluate essays and provide constructive feedback." Mrs. Holloway's hands trembled slightly as she glanced between Dr. Johnson and Malik. The realization was beginning to dawn on her, but she couldn't quite believe it. "Of course," Mrs. Holloway said, her voice strained. She picked up Malik's essay with shaking fingers. "This particular piece demonstrates the importance of students working within their appropriate skill levels." She began to read aloud. "The systemic injustices portrayed in Harper Lee's seminal work reflect the ongoing struggle for equality in contemporary American society." Dr. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "That's quite sophisticated analysis. What grade did this receive?" "An F," Mrs. Holloway whispered, as if hoping no one would hear. The classroom was dead silent. Dr. Johnson took a step closer to Mrs. Holloway, her voice remaining professionally calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "An F. For this level of critical thinking and literary analysis." She paused, her eyes boring into Mrs. Holloway's. "May I ask what criteria you used for this assessment?" Mrs. Holloway opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing she was trapped. Principal Anderson looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable. The student. I believed it was plagiarized." "Based on what evidence?" Dr. Johnson's question was like a scalpel. Mrs. Holloway's eyes darted to Malik, then back to Dr. Johnson, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same intelligent eyes, the same determined jawline, the same quiet strength. "Oh my God," Mrs. Holloway breathed, the color draining completely from her face. You're his mother." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock throughout the classroom. Students gasped, whispered, turned to stare. Principal Anderson's eyes widened in horrified understanding. Dr. Johnson's professional mask finally slipped, revealing the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had just watched her child be humiliated. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of thunder. "I am Dr. Amara Johnson, Malik's mother. And I just watched you fail my son's exceptional work based on your assumption that a black child couldn't possibly be intelligent enough to produce it." The silence in the classroom was deafening. Mrs. Holloway stood frozen, the essay trembling in her hands like a guilty verdict. Principal Anderson's face had gone from confusion to dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Dr. Johnson took a measured step forward, her professional composure intact but her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Mrs. Holloway, I'd like you to explain to me, and to Principal Anderson, exactly what evidence led you to conclude that this essay was plagiarized." Mrs. Holloway's voice cracked. She looked desperately at Principal Anderson, then back at the essay. The vocabulary, the complexity of the arguments, it seemed beyond. Beyond what? Dr. Johnson's voice was silk-wrapped around steel. "Please, complete that sentence." The students watched in fascination and horror. Jenny Martinez had tears in her eyes as she looked at her friend Malik, who sat perfectly still, his face a mask of hurt and dignity that broke his mother's heart. Beyond his grade level, Mrs. Holloway finished weakly. "I see." Dr. Johnson moved closer to Malik's desk. "And what do you know about my son's academic background, Mrs. Holloway?" Mrs. Holloway opened her mouth, but no words came. Dr. Johnson continued, her voice carrying the authority of years in education. "Malik tested into the gifted program at age 7. His IQ is 156. He reads at a college level and has been published in the district's Young Writers magazine 3 times. Her voice grew softer, but more dangerous. "But you wouldn't know any of this because you never bothered to look at his file, did you?" Principal Anderson cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Johnson, perhaps we should." "No, Mr. Anderson." Dr. Johnson held up her hand. "I want to understand Mrs. Holloway's teaching methods." She turned back to the shaking teacher. "Tell me, what grade would you have given this same essay if it had been submitted by, say, Emily Richardson?" She gestured to a blonde girl in the front row who blushed and sank lower in her seat. Mrs. Holloway's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Dr. Johnson picked up the essay and began reading aloud, her clear voice filling the classroom. The parallel between Atticus Finch's moral courage and modern-day advocates for social justice demonstrates that while progress has been made, the fundamental struggle between prejudice and understanding remains our greatest challenge as a society. She looked up. "This is graduate-level analysis, Mrs. Holloway. And you gave it an F." Malik finally spoke, his young voice carrying a maturity that belied his 12 years. "Mom, it's okay. I'm used to it." The words hit Dr. Johnson like physical blows. Her son, her brilliant, kind, extraordinary son, was used to it. Used to having his intelligence questioned, his work dismissed, his potential ignored. "No, baby," she said softly, her professional mask slipping to reveal the fierce mother underneath. "It's not okay. It's never been okay." She turned back to Mrs. Holloway, who was now visibly shaking. "How long has this been going on?" "Dr. Johnson, I can explain." "How long?" Principal Anderson stepped forward. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office." "Answer the question, Mrs. Holloway." Dr. Johnson's voice could have cut glass. Mrs. Holloway looked at Malik, then at the floor. Since the beginning of the school year. 8 months. Dr. Johnson's voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. "You've been systematically undermining my son's education for 8 months." Jenny Martinez suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her voice was shaking with emotion as she spoke. "Mrs. Holloway, that's not true what you said about Malik copying. I've seen him write. He helped me understand Shakespeare when I was struggling. He reads books I can't even pronounce. And. She looked at Malik, tears streaming down her face. "He never said anything mean about you, even when you were mean to him. He said maybe you were just having bad days." The classroom erupted in whispers as other students began to speak up. "Malik tutored me in math. He always shares his lunch with kids who forgot theirs. He's the smartest kid in our grade." Dr. Johnson watched her son's classmates defend him, pride and heartbreak warring on her face. She looked at Malik, who was staring at his desk, overwhelmed by the support and attention. Mrs. Holloway seemed to shrink with each testimony. I didn't mean. I never intended." "What exactly did you intend, Mrs. Holloway?" Dr. Johnson's voice was quiet now, but somehow more terrifying than when she'd been angry. "When you told my son his work was beyond his capabilities, what did you mean?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Suddenly, Malik stood up. His voice was clear and steady as he looked directly at Mrs. Holloway. "Mrs. Holloway, I know you don't like me. I know you think I don't belong in advanced classes. I know you think I'm not smart enough to read the books I love or write the essays I work so hard on." His voice never wavered, but tears began to slip down his cheeks. "But what I don't understand is why you want me to fail so badly. I've never done anything to hurt you." Mrs. Holloway's face crumpled. "Malik, I'm so sorry. Are you sorry because you got caught?" Malik asked, his wisdom startling everyone in the room. "Or are you sorry because you hurt me?" The question hung in the air like a judgment. Dr. Johnson moved to stand behind her son, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. "That's a very good question, Malik. Mrs. Holloway, which is it?" Mrs. Holloway looked around the classroom, at the students staring at her with a mixture of disappointment and disgust, at Principal Anderson's horrified expression, at Dr. Johnson's controlled fury, and finally at Malik's tear-stained but dignified face. She whispered, then louder, "I don't know." The honesty of her confusion seemed to surprise even her. She sank into her chair, the essay still clutched in her trembling hands. Dr. Johnson nodded slowly. "At least that's honest." She looked at Principal Anderson. "Mr. Anderson, I think we need to have a very serious discussion about this school's policies and practices. Immediately." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Johnson knelt down next to Malik's desk. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Malik nodded, though more tears were falling. "I just wanted her to see that I'm smart, Mom. I worked so hard on that essay." "I know you did, baby. And it's brilliant. You're brilliant." She cupped his face in her hands. "Don't you ever let anyone make you dim your light, you understand me?" As they moved toward the door, Mrs. Holloway's voice stopped them. "Malik." He turned back. "Your essay, it really was exceptional. I should have seen that from the beginning." Dr. Johnson and Malik exchanged a look. The apology was a start, but they all knew it was just the beginning of a much longer reckoning. Principal Anderson's office felt smaller than usual with the weight of what had just transpired. Dr. Johnson sat across from his desk, her posture perfect, her briefcase open with Malik's file spread before her. Malik sat beside her, still clutching his failed essay, while Mrs. Holloway occupied the chair furthest from them, looking like she wished she could disappear entirely. Principal Anderson loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Dr. Johnson, I want you to know that Jefferson Elementary has always prided itself on." "Mr. Anderson." Dr. Johnson's voice cut through his prepared speech like a scalpel. "Before you tell me what this school prides itself on, I'd like you to look at something." She pulled a thick folder from her briefcase and placed it on his desk. "This is my son's academic record. Every test score, every assignment grade, every teacher evaluation from kindergarten through 4th grade." Principal Anderson opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the pages. "These scores are extraordinary. Top 1% nationally in reading comprehension, mathematics, and critical thinking," Dr. Johnson confirmed. "Now, Mr. Anderson, I want you to look at his grades from this year." She produced another folder, this one noticeably thinner. Principal Anderson's face paled as he compared the two records. "There's been a dramatic decline," he whispered. A 96% average student suddenly dropping to 72%, only in Mrs. Holloway's class. Dr. Johnson's voice remained professionally calm, but Malik could see the muscle ticking in her jaw. "His other teachers report no problems. In fact, his art teacher nominated him for the District Creativity Award, and his music teacher wants him to audition for the honors choir." Mrs. Holloway shifted in her chair. I grade differently. I have higher standards. Do you? Dr. Johnson turned to face her directly. Then explain this. She pulled out a stack of essays, all graded by Mrs. Holloway. I took the liberty of reviewing other student work from your class this morning. Her fingers moved through the papers methodically. Emily Richardson, B+ for a 3-paragraph book report with multiple grammatical errors. Trevor Walsh, A for an essay that's clearly copied from Wikipedia, complete with hyperlink formatting still visible. Principal Anderson leaned forward to see the evidence, his expression growing more disturbed by the moment. But my son, Dr. Johnson continued, receives an F for a sophisticated literary analysis that demonstrates graduate-level critical thinking skills. Mrs. Holloway suddenly stood up, her composure finally cracking completely. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I graded him harder. Yes, I questioned his work. Because students like him get handed everything these days. Affirmative action, special programs, extra help, and then parents like you come in demanding we lower our standards. The office fell into stunned silence. Malik's eyes widened, and he instinctively moved closer to his mother. Dr. Johnson rose slowly from her chair, her full height and authority filling the room. Students like him? I didn't mean. No, Mrs. Holloway. You meant exactly what you said. Dr. Johnson's voice was deadly quiet. You looked at my brilliant, hard-working, exceptional son and saw only his skin color. You decided that his intelligence was unearned, his achievements undeserved, and his potential non-existent. Principal Anderson was frantically taking notes, realizing this conversation would likely end his career if he didn't handle it properly. Mrs. Holloway, I think you should. No, let her finish. Dr. Johnson never took her eyes off the trembling teacher. I want to hear exactly what she thinks about students like him. Mrs. Holloway seemed to realize she had crossed a line from which there was no return. I have nothing against black students. I've taught many. Have you? Dr. Johnson pulled out another folder. I've reviewed your grading patterns for the past 5 years, Mrs. Holloway. Very interesting trends emerge when you analyze the data. She spread the papers across Principal Anderson's desk like evidence in a courtroom. African American students in your classes average 15 points lower than the school mean. Hispanic students, 12 points lower. But white and Asian students, they perform exactly at or above district averages. Principal Anderson's face went white as he studied the statistics. This could indicate systematic bias. It doesn't indicate anything, Dr. Johnson said firmly. It proves it. Malik, who had been silent through most of the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. His young voice was steady but filled with a wisdom that shouldn't have belonged to a 12-year-old. Mrs. Holloway, can I ask you something? She nodded reluctantly. When you look at me, what do you see? The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through all the adult complexities and laid bare the heart of the matter. Mrs. Holloway opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at this remarkable boy, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time all year. I see. She struggled with the words. I see a student. Just a student? Malik pressed gently. Or do you see something else first? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Mrs. Holloway's eyes filled with tears as the weight of her own prejudices became impossible to ignore. I see. She whispered, I see your color first. And I'm ashamed to admit that I made assumptions based on that. It was the first moment of genuine honesty in the entire confrontation. Dr. Johnson watched her son handle this conversation with more grace than many adults could manage. Pride and heartbreak warred in her chest. "Why?" Malik asked simply. "Why does my color make you think I'm not smart?" Mrs. Holloway was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Because I was taught. I grew up believing. I thought I had changed, but I guess I never really examined what I was carrying inside." Principal Anderson suddenly cleared his throat. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm afraid I have to ask for your resignation, effective immediately." "No." Everyone turned to look at Malik in surprise. "No." Dr. Johnson asked her son. Malik looked at Mrs. Holloway, then at his mother, then at Principal Anderson. "If she just leaves, she doesn't learn anything. And other kids like me will just get another teacher who thinks the same way but hides it better." Dr. Johnson stared at her son in amazement. Even in this moment of vindication, he was thinking about solutions rather than revenge. "What are you suggesting, Malik?" Principal Anderson asked carefully. "I think." Malik paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think Mrs. Holloway should get help. Like counseling or training or something. And maybe she could learn about students like me, really learn, not just pretend to be nice." Mrs. Holloway looked up at him through her tears. "You would, after what I did to you, you would want me to stay and try to do better?" Malik nodded. "My mom always says that people can change if they really want to. Do you really want to change, Mrs. Holloway?" The teacher looked around the room, at the evidence of her bias spread across the desk, at the principal's concerned face, at Dr. Johnson's mixture of pride and wariness, and finally at Malik's earnest, hopeful expression. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes. I want to be better than what I am." Dr. Johnson studied Mrs. Holloway for a long moment, then looked at her extraordinary son. "That's very generous of you, Malik. But Mrs. Holloway needs to understand that generosity comes with conditions." She turned back to the teacher. "If you stay, it won't be easy. You'll undergo mandatory bias training. You'll be monitored closely. You'll write formal apologies to every student you may have unfairly graded. And you'll work with a mentor teacher to completely restructure how you assess and interact with students." Mrs. Holloway nodded eagerly. "Yes. Whatever it takes." "And," Dr. Johnson continued, her voice hardening, "if there is even one hint of biased treatment toward any student going forward, you're gone. No second chances, no explanations, no appeals. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear." Principal Anderson was frantically writing notes. "Dr. Johnson, I'll ensure all of this is properly documented and implemented. We'll also be reviewing our hiring practices and instituting district-wide bias training." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Holloway called out once more, "Malik? Dr. Johnson." They turned back. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've caused pain that can't be undone. But I want you both to know that this conversation has opened my eyes to things about myself that I never wanted to see. I promise you, I will do better." Dr. Johnson nodded curtly, but Malik stepped forward. "Mrs. Holloway? My essay about To Kill a Mockingbird? I wrote about how people can choose to do the right thing even when it's hard. Maybe you can start by giving it the grade it actually deserves." Mrs. Holloway picked up the essay from Principal Anderson's desk, looking at it with new eyes. She pulled out a pen and crossed out the red F, writing a clear A+ in its place. "It's brilliant work, Malik. I should have seen that from the beginning." As they walked out of the office together, Dr. Johnson put her arm around her son's shoulders. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for being smart, but for being wise. And kind. Even when someone didn't deserve it." You taught me that, Mom. You said the goal isn't to punish people for being wrong, but to help them learn how to be right. Dr. Johnson smiled, her heart full of love for this remarkable young man who somehow managed to find hope and possibility even in the darkest situations. But as they walked down the hallway toward Malik's classroom, both of them knew this was just the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would test whether Mrs. Holloway's promise to change was real, or just words spoken in desperation. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation in Principal Anderson's office. The news had spread through Jefferson Elementary like wildfire, whispered in hallways, discussed in the teacher's lounge, and debated at parent pickup. Mrs. Holloway had returned to her classroom after a week of mandatory sensitivity training, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension and scrutiny. Dr. Johnson sat in her district office, reviewing the implementation plan she had developed for Jefferson Elementary. Her phone buzzed with a text from Malik. "Mrs. H is trying really hard, Mom. But some kids are being mean to her now. Is that fair?" She smiled despite herself. Even after everything, her son's compassion continued to amaze her. At Jefferson Elementary, Mrs. Holloway stood at the front of her classroom, addressing her students for the first time since the incident. Her hands shook slightly as she held her prepared notes. "Class, I owe you all an apology," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Especially to Malik, but really to all of you. I let my personal biases affect how I treated students, and that was wrong. Deeply, inexcusably wrong." She looked directly at Malik, who sat in his usual back corner seat. "Malik, your essay was exceptional. It deserved recognition, not punishment. I failed you as a teacher, and more importantly, I failed you as a person who should have seen your brilliance and nurtured it." Several students shifted uncomfortably. Jenny Martinez raised her hand tentatively. "Yes, Jenny." "Mrs. Holloway, are you going to treat everyone fairly now?" It was such a simple question from a 12-year-old, but it cut to the heart of everything. "I'm going to try, Jenny. I'm going to work very hard to examine my assumptions and treat each of you as the unique, valuable individuals you are. But I need you all to help me. If you see me falling back into old patterns, I want you to speak up. Can you do that?" The students exchanged glances. This was unprecedented, a teacher asking them to hold her accountable. Marcus Thompson, one of the few other black students in the class, raised his hand slowly. "Mrs. Holloway, you gave me a C on my science project about famous inventors. But Tommy got a B+ for basically copying stuff from the internet. Is that gonna change?" Mrs. Holloway's cheeks flushed red. She remembered that project, and she remembered her internal dismissal of Marcus's work before she'd even read it carefully. "Marcus, would you be willing to resubmit that project for a fair evaluation? In fact," she looked around the room, "I'd like to offer that opportunity to any student who feels they may not have received fair grading from me this year." The classroom erupted in whispers and surprised looks. "For real?" asked Sophia Wong, a quiet Asian girl who rarely spoke up. "For real," Mrs. Holloway confirmed. "I've been reviewing my grading patterns with Dr. Johnson's oversight, and I've found inconsistencies that need to be addressed." Malik watched this exchange with careful attention. Over the past 2 weeks, he had observed Mrs. Holloway's every interaction, looking for signs of genuine change versus performative remorse. What he saw now was something he hadn't expected: vulnerability. After class, as students filed out for lunch, Malik approached Mrs. Holloway's desk. She looked up nervously. "Malik, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask you something, Mrs. Holloway. When you were in that training last week, what did you learn about yourself?" The question was mature beyond his years, and Mrs. Holloway found herself answering with an honesty that surprised her. "I learned that I was carrying around ideas about people that I didn't even know I had. Ideas my parents taught me, things I saw on TV, assumptions I made without realizing it. She paused, looking directly at him. I learned that I was scared. Scared of what? Scared of being wrong about what I thought I knew. Scared of admitting that maybe kids like you, black kids, Hispanic kids, kids from different backgrounds, might actually be smarter or more talented than I was comfortable accepting. Malik sat down in the chair across from her desk, his young face serious. Mrs. Holloway, can I tell you something? She nodded. When I was 7, I tested into the gifted program, and my mom was so proud. But the first day of advanced classes, this kid's mom saw me and asked the teacher if there had been some mistake, like maybe I was in the wrong classroom. Malik's voice was steady, but Mrs. Holloway could see the pain in his eyes. The teacher didn't say anything to defend me. She just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Mrs. Holloway felt her heart breaking. Malik, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's happened a lot, he continued. Teachers who smile at me but then seem surprised when I know the answers. Kids who think I only got good grades because of diversity stuff. People who act like my success takes something away from them. He looked directly at her. But you were different, Mrs. Holloway. You weren't just surprised by my intelligence. You actively tried to deny it. You tried to make me smaller so you could feel more comfortable. The words hit Mrs. Holloway like physical blows. You're right. God help me, you're absolutely right. But here's what I don't understand, Malik continued. Why did my success threaten you? There's enough room for everyone to be smart, isn't there? Mrs. Holloway was quiet for a long moment, grappling with a question she had never asked herself. I think. She began slowly. I think I was taught that there was a hierarchy. That some people were naturally more capable than others, and that hierarchy made sense of the world for me. When you challenged that with your intelligence and insights, it made me question everything I thought I knew. And that scared you. Terrified me, she admitted. Because if I was wrong about you, what else was I wrong about? The classroom door opened, and Dr. Johnson walked in, carrying a folder and wearing an expression that was carefully neutral. Dr. Johnson, Mrs. Holloway stood up quickly. I wasn't expecting you today. Weekly check-in, Dr. Johnson replied crisply. How are things going, Malik? Before Malik could answer, Mrs. Holloway spoke up. Dr. Johnson, your son has been gracious. More gracious than I deserve. He's helping me understand things about myself that I never wanted to face. Dr. Johnson studied both of them carefully. Malik, how do you feel about being in this position? You shouldn't have to be your teacher's educator about basic human decency. It was a fair point, and Malik considered it seriously. I think sometimes the only way to change someone's mind is to show them what they're missing. Mrs. Holloway missed seeing who I really am. Now she's trying to see. He looked at his teacher. But Mrs. Holloway, you need to do this work for all your students, not just because my mom is watching. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Holloway said immediately. And I am. I've been reviewing every student's work with fresh eyes. I've found patterns in my grading that I'm ashamed of. Dr. Johnson opened her folder. Speaking of which, let's discuss your progress report, Mrs. Holloway. She spread several papers across the desk. I've been analyzing your recent grades and classroom interactions. The good news is that I can see genuine effort to change your approach. Mrs. Holloway looked relieved. However, Dr. Johnson continued, change isn't just about fair grading. It's about genuinely seeing and nurturing each child's potential. Are you prepared for what that really means? I think so. Yes. Dr. Johnson pulled out a photograph from her folder. It showed Malik at age 7, holding a trophy and grinning widely. "This is my son at his first academic decathlon. He was the youngest competitor by 2 years and finished 3rd overall." She looked at Mrs. Holloway intently. "When you look at this picture, what do you see?" Mrs. Holloway studied the photo carefully. "I see a brilliant young boy who was probably underestimated by everyone around him." "Good. Now I want you to remember that feeling, that recognition of his potential and the injustice of people underestimating him, every time you look at every student in your classroom." Mrs. Holloway nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Dr. Johnson, I know I can't undo the damage I've done. But I want you to know that this isn't just about keeping my job anymore. It's about becoming the teacher these kids deserve." Dr. Johnson studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Holloway, I want to believe that. But belief has to be earned through actions, not words." She turned to Malik. "And you, young man, while I'm proud of your maturity and compassion, remember that you are the child in this situation. You shouldn't have to carry the burden of fixing adult problems." Malik nodded. "I know, Mom. But if I can help make it better for other kids like me, isn't that worth something?" Dr. Johnson's stern expression softened as she looked at her remarkable son. "It is worth something, baby. But it shouldn't be your responsibility." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Holloway called out once more, "Dr. Johnson? Malik? Thank you for giving me this chance. I won't waste it." Walking down the hallway, Dr. Johnson put her arm around Malik's shoulders. "How are you really doing with all this, sweetheart?" "It's hard, Mom. Sometimes I wonder if she's really changing or just scared of getting in trouble." "That's a very wise question. What do you think?" Malik considered this carefully. "I think maybe it's both right now. She's definitely scared. But I also think she's starting to really see me, and other kids, differently. Whether that lasts when no one is watching, I guess we'll find out." Dr. Johnson squeezed his shoulder. "You know what I love most about you?" "What?" "You have hope even when you have every reason to be cynical. That's a gift, Malik. Don't ever lose that." As they reached the school's exit, neither of them noticed Mrs. Holloway watching them from her classroom window, her own expression thoughtful and determined. She had a long way to go to earn their trust, but for the first time in her career, she was motivated by something more powerful than fear or obligation. She was motivated by the possibility of becoming worthy of the remarkable students in her care. 3 weeks into the new grading system, Mrs. Holloway faced her first major test. The annual district writing competition was approaching, and each teacher could nominate only one student to represent their class. In previous years, her choice had always been obvious, usually Emily Richardson or another student who fit her unconscious expectations of academic excellence. This year was different. Mrs. Holloway sat at her kitchen table at home, surrounded by exceptional essays from her students. Malik's piece about overcoming adversity was profound and moving. Marcus Thompson had written a stunning analysis of environmental justice that connected local issues to global patterns. Jenny Martinez had crafted a beautiful narrative about her grandmother's immigration story. Even students she had previously overlooked had produced work that took her breath away. Her phone rang, interrupting her deliberation. The caller ID showed her sister's name. "Patricia? I heard about what happened at your school. Are you okay?" Mrs. Holloway sighed. The local news had picked up the story, though they had kept names confidential. "I'm processing things, Linda." "Well, I hope you don't let them railroad you into some political correctness nonsense. You've been teaching for 30 years. You know how to assess students." The comment hit Mrs. Holloway like a slap. 30 years. And how many talented students had she underestimated? How many futures had she potentially derailed with her unconscious bias? Linda, I have to go. I have some important decisions to make. The next morning, Mrs. Holloway stood before her class with an unusual announcement. Class, I have something special to share with you. For the district writing competition, I'm recommending not one, but 3 students from our class. The students looked surprised. That wasn't how it usually worked. I've spoken with Principal Anderson, and we've decided that our class has too much exceptional talent to limit ourselves to just one representative. She looked around the room. Malik Johnson, Marcus Thompson, and Jenny Martinez, congratulations. You're all going to represent Jefferson Elementary. The classroom erupted in cheers and applause. Malik looked stunned, while Marcus actually started crying with joy. After class, Emily Richardson approached Mrs. Holloway's desk, her usual confidence shaken. Mrs. Holloway, what about my essay? I usually. Mrs. Holloway looked at the girl who had been her consistent favorite, blonde, well-spoken, from a wealthy family. Emily's essay was competent, well-structured, but ultimately safe and predictable. Emily, your essay was very good. But very good isn't the same as exceptional. These 3 students produced work that was truly outstanding. But I've never not been chosen for competitions before, Emily said, tears forming in her eyes. Mrs. Holloway felt a pang of recognition. This was what privilege looked like when it was challenged, the assumption that success was a birthright rather than something to be earned. Emily, you're a talented writer. But maybe this is an opportunity to push yourself harder, to take more risks in your work, rather than relying on familiar advantages. As Emily walked away, clearly upset, Mrs. Holloway wondered if she was making the right choices. Change was harder than she had anticipated, not just for her, but for everyone affected by her new approach. That afternoon, Dr. Johnson made her regular visit to the classroom. She had been observing Mrs. Holloway's progress with cautious optimism, but she remained watchful for any signs of backsliding. Dr. Johnson, Mrs. Holloway said as students filed out for the day, I wanted to discuss something with you. She explained her decision about the writing competition, watching Dr. Johnson's face carefully for any reaction. 3 students instead of 1, Dr. Johnson mused. That's unprecedented. I know it breaks protocol, but the work these kids produced was exceptional. I couldn't justify choosing just one when all 3 deserved recognition. Dr. Johnson studied Mrs. Holloway carefully. And how did other students react to your choices? Mrs. Holloway hesitated. Emily Richardson was disappointed. Her parents have already called Principal Anderson twice today. Ah. Dr. Johnson's expression was knowing. And how does that make you feel? Honestly? Scared. The Richardsons have a lot of influence in this district. They could make trouble for me, and for you by extension. Mrs. Holloway, let me ask you something, Dr. Johnson said, settling into the chair across from her. What do you think courage looks like in a classroom? Mrs. Holloway considered the question carefully. I used to think it meant maintaining high standards and not backing down from difficult parents. And now? Now I think it means seeing every child clearly, really seeing them, and being willing to advocate for their potential even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Dr. Johnson nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. And Mrs. Holloway? You're about to find out just how much courage you actually have. Her words proved prophetic. Within an hour of Dr. Johnson's departure, Mrs. Holloway received a call to report to Principal Anderson's office immediately. She found Principal Anderson sitting across from Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, both of whom looked furious. Mr. Richardson, a prominent local attorney, spoke first. Mrs. Holloway, We need to discuss your recent judgment issues. I'm sorry. Mrs. Richardson leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. Our daughter has been the top student in every class she's been in. She's won every writing competition she's entered. And now you're telling us that she's somehow not good enough to represent her own class. Mrs. Holloway felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. These were the parents who donated generously to school programs, who had connections to the school board, who could make or break a teacher's career. Mrs. Richardson, Emily is a very good student. But this year, other students produced work that was simply more exceptional. More exceptional than our daughter? Mr. Richardson's voice was incredulous. Let me guess, you chose the black kid whose mother is breathing down your neck, right? The racial slur hung in the air like poison. Principal Anderson shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Holloway felt something shift inside her, a line being crossed that she couldn't uncross. For the first time in her career, she saw clearly what she had been part of, what she had perpetuated, and what she absolutely would not tolerate anymore. Mr. Richardson, she said, her voice steady and clear, I chose 3 students whose work was exceptional by any objective measure. If you'd like to review their essays alongside Emily's, I'd be happy to arrange that. We don't need to review anything, Mrs. Richardson snapped. We know quality when we see it. And we know favoritism when we see it too. Mrs. Holloway stood up, her full height impressive despite her slight frame. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Richardson. You do know favoritism when you see it. Because you've been benefiting from it for years. The office fell silent. Emily has received advantages and considerations that other students haven't, not because her work was superior, but because of assumptions about who deserves recognition. That ends now. Principal Anderson looked panicked. Mrs. Holloway, perhaps we should. No, Mr. Anderson. These parents need to understand that their daughter's worthiness isn't diminished by other students' excellence. But their insistence that she deserves recognition simply because of who she is, that's the real problem here. Mr. Richardson stood up, his face red with anger. We'll see about this. We'll see how long you last when the school board hears about your reverse racism. Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Holloway said quietly, there's nothing reverse about recognizing talent wherever it exists. There's nothing discriminatory about fair evaluation. And there's nothing racist about refusing to perpetuate a system that automatically advantages some children while overlooking others. After the Richardsons stormed out, Principal Anderson slumped in his chair. Mrs. Holloway, you realize they could make serious trouble for both of us? Yes, I do. But Mr. Anderson, do you know what would be worse than losing my job over this? He shook his head. Losing my soul by going back to who I used to be. That evening, Mrs. Holloway sat in her empty classroom, grading papers by the light of her desk lamp. She had made her choice, and there was no going back. Tomorrow, she would face whatever consequences came from her decision to put principle over politics. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Holloway, this is Marcus Thompson's mom. I heard about what you did today. Thank you for seeing my son. Really seeing him. That means everything to our family. Similar messages followed throughout the evening, from Jenny Martinez's grandmother, from other parents who had watched their children's talents go unrecognized for too long. Finally, as she packed up to leave, one last message appeared, this one from Dr. Johnson. Mrs. Holloway, you faced your first real test today. You chose courage over comfort, justice over convenience. That's the teacher these children deserve. Well done. Mrs. Holloway smiled, tears in her eyes. For the first time in 30 years of teaching, she felt like she was finally doing the job right. But as she turned off the lights and locked her classroom door, she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Change was never easy, and powerful people didn't give up their advantages without a fight. The question was, would she have the strength to keep choosing courage when the stakes got even higher? The school board meeting was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread quickly through the affluent neighborhoods surrounding Jefferson Elementary about Mrs. Holloway's controversial choices for the writing competition. The Richardsons sat in the front row, flanked by other influential parents who saw this as a direct challenge to their children's assumed privileges. Dr. Johnson sat near the back, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes alert. She had faced this kind of political pressure many times in her career, but watching it target someone who was genuinely trying to change was particularly painful. Mrs. Holloway sat alone at a small table facing the school board, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Principal Anderson sat beside her, visibly sweating despite the air conditioning. Board President Margaret Whitmore called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to address concerns raised by several parents regarding classroom management and student assessment practices at Jefferson Elementary. Mr. Richardson stood up, his expensive suit and confident demeanor commanding immediate attention. Board members, my wife and I, along with several other concerned families, are here because we believe there has been a serious breach of educational standards in Mrs. Holloway's classroom. He gestured dramatically toward Mrs. Holloway. For 30 years, this teacher maintained excellence. Suddenly, she's making decisions that appear to be based not on merit, but on political correctness and outside pressure. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the packed room. Our children who have consistently excelled, who have been recognized for their academic achievements, are now being passed over in favor of students whose work simply doesn't measure up to traditional standards. Dr. Johnson had heard enough. She stood up, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Board President Whitmore, may I address these allegations? Dr. Johnson, while we appreciate your oversight of this situation, this hearing is specifically about my son, Dr. Johnson interrupted, her professional composure intact but her voice carrying unmistakable authority. Mr. Richardson just accused Malik Johnson of receiving unearned recognition. I think that deserves a response. She walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking authoritatively on the polished floor. From her briefcase, she pulled out 3 essays and placed them on the podium. These are the 3 essays that Mrs. Holloway selected for the writing competition. I invite any board member, any parent in this room, to read them and tell me which ones represent superior work. She removed the names from the top of each paper. Let's make this fair. No names, no assumptions. Just the work itself. Board member Dr. Patricia Wells reached for the essays. After several minutes of reading, she looked up with surprise. These are exceptional pieces of writing. All 3. Would you read excerpts aloud, Dr. Wells? Dr. Wells cleared her throat and began reading from the first essay. The weight of environmental injustice falls heaviest on communities that have the least political power to fight back. When we poison the air that children breathe for the sake of corporate profits, we are stealing not just their present health, but their future dreams. She looked up. This is sophisticated analysis with powerful imagery. She continued with the second essay. My grandmother's hands tell stories of 2 countries, the calluses from cotton fields in Mexico, the burns from restaurant kitchens in America. Each scar is a word in the language of sacrifice, each wrinkle a sentence in the story of love that brought our family here. Several people in the audience were visibly moved by the beautiful prose. The third essay was equally powerful. To overcome adversity, we must first acknowledge that not all starting lines are in the same place. Some runners begin with hurdles already in their path, while others start on smooth tracks. True fairness isn't pretending everyone has the same advantages, it's recognizing extraordinary effort regardless of where the race begins. When Dr. Wells finished reading, the room was silent. The quality of all three pieces was undeniable. "Now," Dr. Johnson said, "I'd like to share the essay that was passed over, the one that some parents feel should have been chosen instead." She pulled out Emily Richardson's essay and handed it to Dr. Wells, who read it silently before speaking. "This is competent, well-structured, but compared to the other three..." She trailed off, the comparison speaking for itself. Mr. Richardson's face was red with anger and embarrassment. "This is exactly what we're talking about. Since when do we prioritize flowery language over proper academic structure?" "Since always, Mr. Richardson," Mrs. Holloway said, standing up for the first time during the meeting. Her voice was shaky at first, but grew stronger with each word. "Exceptional writing has always been about more than following a formula. It's about insight, creativity, emotional truth, and the ability to make readers see the world differently." She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "For 30 years, I thought I was maintaining high standards. What I was actually doing was maintaining comfortable assumptions about who deserved recognition and who didn't." Mrs. Richardson stood up, her voice shrill with indignation. "So you're admitting that you've been grading unfairly? That you've been discriminating against our children?" Mrs. Holloway took a deep breath, knowing her next words would either end her career or transform it completely. "Mrs. Richardson, I've been discriminating, yes. But not against your children. I've been discriminating in their favor for years, without even realizing it." Gasps echoed through the room. "I gave higher grades to students who looked like what I expected success to look like. I praised work that was safe and familiar while dismissing writing that was bold and different. I assumed that certain students couldn't produce excellent work, so I didn't look hard enough to see when they did." She turned to face the school board directly. "I was part of a system that told some children they were naturally gifted while telling others they needed to work twice as hard for half the recognition. And I was wrong. Completely, shamefully wrong." The room erupted in angry voices, but Mrs. Holloway continued speaking over the noise. "Emily Richardson is a lovely girl and a capable student. But her work wasn't chosen because it wasn't the best work submitted. It's that simple. And if we can't accept that, if we insist that certain children deserve recognition regardless of the quality of their actual work, then we're not maintaining standards. We're perpetuating privilege." Board member James Crawford, a black man who had been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "Mrs. Holloway, these are serious admissions. Are you prepared to face the consequences of acknowledging this pattern of bias?" "Mr. Crawford, I'm more prepared to face those consequences than I am to continue perpetuating harm against the students in my care." Dr. Johnson watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and concern. Mrs. Holloway was showing remarkable courage, but courage didn't always protect people from political retaliation. "Furthermore," Mrs. Holloway continued, "I want to publicly apologize to every student and family that I may have failed over the years. My bias wasn't intentional, but that doesn't make it less harmful. I'm committed to doing better, and I hope this district will support that growth rather than punish it." Board President Whitmore called for order. "Mrs. Holloway, while we appreciate your honesty, the board needs to consider whether someone who admits to years of biased practices should continue in the classroom." Before Mrs. Holloway could respond, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. "May I say something?" Everyone turned to see a young black woman standing up, holding the hand of a teenage boy. "I'm Angela Thompson, Marcus Thompson's mother. Marcus is one of the students chosen for the writing competition." She walked to the front of the room, her son beside her. "For 3 years, I watched my son come home frustrated because his teachers didn't seem to see his potential. His grades were mediocre, his confidence was low, and I was starting to think maybe he just wasn't academically gifted." She looked directly at Mrs. Holloway. Then this year, something changed. Marcus started coming home excited about writing, proud of his assignments, confident in his abilities. For the first time in his school career, a teacher was really seeing him. Marcus stepped forward, his voice strong despite his nervousness. Mrs. Holloway didn't just change my grades. She changed how I see myself. She made me believe that my ideas matter, that my voice matters, that I belong in advanced classes. Other parents began to speak up, families whose children had flourished under Mrs. Holloway's new approach, students who had been overlooked for years finally getting the recognition they deserved. But the influential families weren't backing down. Mrs. Richardson stood again, her voice cutting through the testimonials. This is all very touching, but the bottom line is that our children's futures are being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. We won't stand for it. The room divided along clear lines, working-class families and families of color supporting Mrs. Holloway, affluent white families demanding her removal. Board President Whitmore looked overwhelmed by the passion on both sides. We'll need time to deliberate on this matter. This hearing is adjourned pending further review. As people filed out, Mrs. Holloway sat alone at her table, emotionally drained but oddly at peace. She had told the truth, faced her accusers, and stood up for her students. Whatever happened next, she had finally found her integrity. Dr. Johnson approached her as the room emptied. That was brave, Mrs. Holloway. Regardless of what the board decides, you did the right thing tonight. Dr. Johnson, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I can actually undo the damage I've done? Do you think it's possible to truly change after 30 years of unconscious bias? Dr. Johnson considered the question carefully. Mrs. Holloway, change is always possible. But it's not about undoing the past, it's about choosing differently going forward. Tonight, you chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience. That's how change happens, one choice at a time. As they walked out of the building together, both women knew that the real test was yet to come. The school board would make their decision within a week, and that decision would determine not just Mrs. Holloway's fate, but the message the district would send about whether genuine change was valued or punished. The battle for Jefferson Elementary's soul was far from over. The week following the school board meeting felt like an eternity. Mrs. Holloway went through the motions of teaching, but the uncertainty hung over every interaction. Some parents had pulled their children from her class, while others had specifically requested transfers into it. The hallways buzzed with whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she appeared. Malik noticed the change immediately. His teacher, who had been growing more confident and genuine over the past month, now seemed fragile, uncertain. During lunch on Wednesday, he made a decision that would have surprised even his mother. Mrs. Holloway, he said, approaching her desk after the other students had left for recess. Can I ask you something? She looked up from the papers she was grading with less enthusiasm than usual. Of course, Malik. Are you sorry you stood up for us at the board meeting? The question caught her off guard. Why would you ask that? Because you look sad. And scared. And I know some parents are being really mean to you. Mrs. Holloway set down her red pen. She had switched to green weeks ago, another small change in her transformation, and really looked at this remarkable boy who somehow always asked the most important questions. Malik, I'm not sorry I stood up for you and Marcus and Jenny. I'm not sorry I told the truth about my past mistakes. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I am scared about what might happen next. What's the worst thing that could happen? I could lose my job. I could lose the chance to keep learning how to be a better teacher. Malik was quiet for a moment, then said something that stopped Mrs. Holloway's heart. Mrs. Holloway, What if losing this job means you get to find the job you're supposed to have? Before she could ask what he meant, the classroom door opened. Dr. Johnson walked in, followed by Principal Anderson and a woman Mrs. Holloway didn't recognize. "Mrs. Holloway," Dr. Johnson said, her expression unreadable, "this is Superintendent Dr. Maria Rodriguez. She'd like to speak with you." Mrs. Holloway's stomach dropped. The superintendent's presence could only mean one thing: the board had made their decision, and it wasn't good. "Mrs. Holloway," Dr. Rodriguez said, extending her hand, "I've been following your situation with great interest." They shook hands, and Mrs. Holloway was surprised by the firmness and warmth of the superintendent's grip. "Dr. Rodriguez, I want you to know that I take full responsibility for my past biases and their impact on students. I understand if the district feels they can no longer trust me in the classroom." Dr. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "Mrs. Holloway, in my 25 years in education, I've seen teachers handle accusations of bias in many different ways. Some deny everything. Some make excuses. Some blame the students, the parents, or the system." Mrs. Holloway braced herself for what was coming next. "You did something I've rarely seen. You looked honestly at yourself, admitted your failures, and committed to genuine change. That takes extraordinary courage." Mrs. Holloway felt confused. "Dr. Rodriguez, I appreciate that, but—" "The school board met in emergency session last night," Dr. Rodriguez interrupted. It was a heated discussion that lasted nearly 4 hours. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. "Mrs. Holloway, by a vote of 4 to 3, the board has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit like physical blows. Mrs. Holloway felt her knees buckle slightly, and she gripped the edge of her desk for support. Malik gasped, and Dr. Johnson's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "However," Dr. Rodriguez continued, and something in her tone made everyone look up sharply, "I want you to know that I voted against that decision. Along with board members Crawford and Wells." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. "Mrs. Holloway, I've been superintendent of this district for 3 years. In that time, I've been looking for teachers who understand that genuine excellence requires genuine equity, educators who can see past their assumptions and nurture every child's potential." Mrs. Holloway wiped tears from her eyes, trying to follow where this conversation was heading. "The Riverside District, where I previously served as superintendent, has been looking for someone to head their new Equity in Education initiative. It's a position that would involve training teachers, developing curriculum, and working directly with students who have been underserved by traditional approaches." Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened. Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a calling," Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. "The position pays significantly more than your current salary, comes with district-wide authority, and would allow you to help other teachers avoid the mistakes you made while building on the growth you've achieved." The room was silent as everyone processed this unexpected turn. "But Dr. Rodriguez," Mrs. Holloway said slowly, "why would you trust someone who admits to 30 years of biased teaching?" "Because, Mrs. Holloway, someone who has genuinely grappled with their biases and committed to change is exactly the person who can help other teachers do the same. You can't teach what you haven't learned, and you can't lead where you haven't been." She opened the folder and spread out several documents. "I've been watching your transformation over the past 2 months. I've read the testimonials from parents whose children flourished in your classroom once you began seeing them clearly. I've reviewed the work of students like Marcus Thompson, whose confidence and performance improved dramatically under your new approach." Dr. Johnson stepped forward. "Mrs. Holloway, Dr. Rodriguez reached out to me last week to discuss this possibility. I told her that while your journey has been painful to witness, your growth has been genuine and remarkable." Malik, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Holloway, remember what I said? About losing this job so you could find the right one." Everyone turned to look at the 12-year-old who somehow seemed to understand the significance of this moment better than the adults. "You've learned how to really see students, right? How to help kids like me and Marcus and Jenny feel smart and valued." Mrs. Holloway nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then maybe you're supposed to teach other teachers how to do that too." Dr. Rodriguez smiled at Malik's insight. "Exactly right, young man. Mrs. Holloway, this position would allow you to work with hundreds of teachers across the district. You could help them recognize and overcome the same biases you've faced. You could be part of ensuring that students like Malik never have to wonder if their intelligence is really valued." Mrs. Holloway looked around the room, at Dr. Rodriguez's hopeful expression, at Dr. Johnson's encouraging nod, at Principal Anderson's mixture of sadness and pride, and finally at Malik's wise, supportive eyes. I would be honored to accept that position," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent." Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a contract. "You'll start in 2 weeks, which gives you time to finish out your commitments here and prepare for the transition." As Dr. Rodriguez and Principal Anderson stepped out to discuss logistics, Dr. Johnson approached Mrs. Holloway. "Congratulations," she said, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, her smile seemed genuinely warm. "Dr. Johnson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "Do you forgive me? For what I did to Malik, for the months of undermining his confidence and dismissing his potential?" Dr. Johnson was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Mrs. Holloway, forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to feel. But what I can say is that I see genuine change in you. I see someone who faced her worst self and chose to become better." She looked at Malik, who was organizing papers at his desk, pretending not to listen. "My son forgave you before I did. He saw your potential for growth even when I was still focused on protecting him from your biases. Maybe that's something else you can learn from him." Mrs. Holloway knelt down next to Malik's desk. "Malik, I want you to know something. You taught me more about teaching in 2 months than I learned in 30 years of thinking I already knew everything." Malik looked up at her, his eyes serious but kind. "Mrs. Holloway, you know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "Now other kids won't have to go through what I went through. Other teachers will learn how to see all their students from the beginning." Mrs. Holloway felt tears streaming down her face, tears of gratitude, of hope, of possibility. "You're right, Malik. And that makes everything we went through worth it." As the afternoon sun streamed through the classroom windows, Mrs. Holloway began packing up her desk, not in defeat, but in preparation for a new chapter. The scared, biased teacher who had walked into this classroom at the beginning of the school year was gone. In her place was someone ready to help other educators see what she had learned to see, that every child, regardless of their background or appearance, deserved to have their brilliance recognized and nurtured. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Holloway stood in front of her new office at the Riverside District Education Center. The nameplate on the door read, "Patricia Holloway, Director of Equity in Education." It felt surreal, almost impossible that she had gone from nearly losing her career to being entrusted with one of the most important positions in the district. Her first assignment was to conduct a workshop for 20 veteran teachers from across the district, educators who had been recommended for bias training after concerning patterns in their grading and student interactions had been identified. As she looked at the faces in the training room, Mrs. Holloway saw herself from 6 months ago, defensive, uncomfortable, convinced they were being unfairly targeted by political correctness. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Patricia Holloway, and before we start, I want to tell you something that might surprise you. 6 months ago, I was exactly where you are right now." The teachers looked skeptical, some rolling their eyes or crossing their arms. I was a veteran teacher with 32 years of experience who was convinced I treated all my students fairly. I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. She walked to the front of the room and placed a photograph on the overhead projector. It was Malik's essay, the one she had originally given an F. This essay received a failing grade in my classroom. Not because it was poorly written, but because I couldn't believe that the student who wrote it was capable of such sophisticated analysis. She paused, letting the words sink in. That student was Malik Johnson, a 12-year-old boy with an IQ of 156 and reading comprehension scores in the 99th percentile. But when I looked at him, I didn't see his intelligence. I saw my assumptions about what intelligence should look like. One of the teachers, Mrs. Janet Mills, interrupted. "Look, Mrs. Holloway, I appreciate your confession, but some of us have been teaching successfully for decades without any problems. Maybe you had issues, but that doesn't mean we all do." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "You know what, Mrs. Mills? You're absolutely right. Maybe you don't have the same biases I had. Let's find out." She pulled out a stack of essays, all with the students' names removed. "These are writing samples from 5th grade students across the district. I'd like you all to grade them using whatever criteria you normally use." The teachers spent the next 20 minutes reading and grading. When they finished, Mrs. Holloway collected their evaluations and compiled the results on a spreadsheet projected for everyone to see. The pattern was stark and undeniable. Essays written by students with traditionally white names received significantly higher grades than identical quality work by students with traditionally black or Hispanic names. "But wait," Mrs. Mills protested, "we didn't know the students' names." "You're right. But look at this." Mrs. Holloway pulled out another set of the same essays, this time with the original names attached. "These are the exact same papers you just graded, but now you can see who wrote them." The room fell silent as teachers realized what had happened. Even without knowing the students' names, they had somehow assessed the work differently based on subtle cues in the writing, neighborhood references, cultural contexts, family situations mentioned in personal narratives. Mrs. Sarah Chun, a younger teacher, raised her hand tentatively. "Mrs. Holloway, this is really disturbing. I don't think I'm racist, but these results suggest otherwise." "Mrs. Chun, that's exactly how I felt when Dr. Johnson first showed me the patterns in my grading. The hardest thing to accept wasn't that I was biased. It was that my bias was unconscious. I genuinely thought I was being fair." Mrs. Holloway moved to the whiteboard and wrote a single question in large letters. "What if we've been measuring the wrong things?" She turned back to the group. "For years, I thought academic excellence looked like students who spoke like me, wrote about experiences I could relate to, and demonstrated intelligence in ways I recognized. But what if excellence actually looks like a child who writes about environmental justice in language that draws from both academic vocabulary and street wisdom? What if brilliance sounds like a student who analyzes literature through the lens of their grandmother's immigration story?" She pulled up Malik's essay on the projector and read it aloud, her voice strong and clear. "The parallel between Atticus Finch's moral courage and modern-day advocates for social justice demonstrates that while progress has been made, the fundamental struggle between prejudice and understanding remains our greatest challenge as a society." When she finished reading, the room was quiet. This was written by a 12-year-old black boy from a working-class family. When I first read it, I assumed it was plagiarized because it didn't match my narrow definition of what intelligence looks like at that age. Mrs. Mills shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. "But Mrs. Holloway, how do we know when work is genuinely exceptional versus when we're just lowering standards?" "That's the wrong question," Mrs. Mills. The right question is, how do we recognize genuine excellence wherever it appears, regardless of whether it looks familiar to us? She walked over to a flip chart and wrote, "Excellence isn't about conformity. It's about insight, creativity, critical thinking, and the ability to communicate ideas effectively." The door to the training room opened, and Dr. Johnson walked in, followed by Malik, Marcus Thompson, and Jenny Martinez. "I hope we're not interrupting," Dr. Johnson said with a smile, "but I thought it might be valuable for you to meet some of the students whose potential has been overlooked by unconscious bias." Mrs. Holloway's face lit up. "Not interrupting at all. Please come in." Malik stepped forward, looking confident but respectful. "Hi, Mrs. Holloway. We heard you were helping other teachers learn what you learned." "That's right, Malik. Would you like to share anything with these educators?" Malik looked around the room at the 20 teachers, many of whom were seeing him clearly for the first time. "I guess I just want you to know that when a teacher really sees you, like really sees your potential and your ideas, it changes everything. It makes you want to work harder and dream bigger. But when they don't see you, when they assume you can't do something before you even try, it makes you wonder if maybe they're right." Marcus Thompson stepped forward. "Before this year, I thought I was bad at writing. I thought maybe I just wasn't smart enough for advanced classes. But it turned out I just needed a teacher who could see what I was actually capable of." Jenny Martinez nodded. "My grandmother always told me stories about coming to America, but I never thought those stories were worth writing about until Mrs. Holloway showed me that my family's experiences were just as valuable as anyone else's." The teachers in the room were visibly moved. Several were wiping their eyes. Mrs. Chen raised her hand again. "Students, can you tell us, how do you know when a teacher really sees you?" Malik thought for a moment. "They don't act surprised when you're smart. They expect you to be excellent, and they help you get there." Marcus added, "They don't make you prove you belong in advanced classes. They assume you belong and figure out how to help you succeed." Jenny concluded, "They don't try to change how you think or where you come from. They help you use those things to make your work even better." After the students left, the room buzzed with conversation. Teachers were sharing their own experiences, questioning their assumptions, and asking genuine questions about how to do better. Mrs. Mills, who had been the most resistant, approached Mrs. Holloway during the break. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "When I saw those grading results, when I heard those students speak, I realized I've probably hurt kids without even knowing it." "Mrs. Mills, that's exactly how I felt. The question now is, what are you going to do with that realization?" "I want to learn. Really learn. Not just go through the motions of training, but actually change how I see and teach my students." Mrs. Holloway smiled. "That's exactly the right attitude. Change is possible, but it requires genuine commitment to examining ourselves honestly." As the day's training concluded, Mrs. Holloway felt a deep sense of purpose she had never experienced in 32 years of classroom teaching. This work, helping other educators recognize and overcome their biases, felt like what she was meant to do. Dr. Johnson lingered after the other teachers had left. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Terrifying and exhilarating," Mrs. Holloway admitted. "But also, right. Like this is what I was supposed to be doing all along." "You know, Mrs. Holloway, when this all started, I was focused on protecting my son from your biases. I never imagined that your transformation would end up helping so many other children." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Malik changed my life, Dr. Johnson. But more than that, he showed me that change is possible at any age, in any circumstances, if we're willing to do the hard work of honest self-examination." As they packed up the training materials, Both women reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a painful confrontation over one student's mistreatment had evolved into a district-wide initiative to ensure that all students received the recognition and support they deserved. The transformation was no longer just personal, it was institutional. And that meant thousands of students would benefit from the lessons learned in Mrs. Holloway's journey from bias to understanding. But the real test would come in the months ahead, as these teachers returned to their classrooms and faced the daily challenge of seeing each student clearly, nurturing each potential, and refusing to let assumptions limit any child's possibilities. The work was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. 6 months later, the annual Jefferson Elementary Academic Awards ceremony was unlike any in the school's history. The auditorium was packed with families from every corner of the community. Parents who had never felt welcome at school events now sat proudly in the front rows alongside those who had always assumed their place there. Principal Anderson stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd with genuine satisfaction. This year has been one of extraordinary growth for our school community. We've learned that excellence isn't about maintaining familiar standards, it's about recognizing and nurturing potential wherever it exists. In the audience, Dr. Johnson sat with her husband and Malik, watching as student after student was recognized for achievements that might have gone unnoticed in previous years. The essay contest winners, Malik, Marcus, and Jenny, had all advanced to state competition, with Marcus actually taking first place at regionals. Mrs. Holloway sat in the back of the auditorium, having been invited as a special guest. She watched with pride as students she had taught, students whose potential she had nearly missed, stepped forward to receive recognition for their academic achievements, artistic talents, and leadership qualities. Our next award, Principal Anderson announced, goes to a student who has shown extraordinary resilience, wisdom, and compassion throughout this year's challenges. The Jefferson Elementary Student Leadership Award goes to Malik Johnson. The auditorium erupted in applause as Malik walked to the stage. He looked poised and confident, no longer the boy who had sat in the back corner hoping his teacher would see his intelligence. At the microphone, Malik's voice was clear and strong. This award doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to everyone who believed that I could earn it, my mom, my friends, my new teachers, and even Mrs. Holloway. He looked directly at her in the back of the auditorium. Mrs. Holloway taught me something really important this year. She taught me that people can change, even when that change is hard. She also taught me that standing up for what's right sometimes means making people uncomfortable, but it's worth it when it helps other kids. Malik paused, then continued with words that surprised everyone, including his mother. I want to use this award to start something new at Jefferson Elementary. With Principal Anderson's permission, I'd like to create a student mentoring program where older students help younger kids who might be getting overlooked, just like I was. He looked back at Mrs. Holloway. And I'd like Mrs. Holloway to help us design it, because she knows better than anyone what it looks like when potential gets missed, and what it takes to make sure that doesn't happen again. The applause was thunderous. Mrs. Holloway found herself crying, tears of joy, pride, and amazement at this remarkable young man who continued to choose healing over hurt, growth over grudge. After the ceremony, families mingled in the school lobby. Mrs. Holloway was approached by countless parents, some thanking her for the changes she had sparked, others sharing stories of their children's newfound confidence in school. Angela Thompson, Marcus's mother, grabbed Mrs. Holloway's hands. I don't know if you understand what you did for my son. Not just the writing competition, but showing him that his voice matters, that his experiences have value. He wants to be a journalist now because he says he has stories to tell that need to be heard. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Students who had been overlooked were now thriving, parents who had felt marginalized now felt welcomed, and teachers who had undergone bias training were discovering talents in students they had never noticed before. As the evening wound down, Dr. Johnson approached Mrs. Holloway with a proposal that would change everything once again. "Mrs. Holloway, I have something to discuss with you. The State Education Department has been following your work with great interest. They want to expand the equity program statewide." Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened. "Statewide? They're offering you the position of State Director of Educational Equity. You would oversee training programs in every district in the state, work with university education programs to integrate bias awareness into teacher preparation, and develop policies to ensure that what happened to Malik never happens to another child." Mrs. Holloway was speechless. From a teacher facing termination 6 months ago to potentially impacting education policy for an entire state, it seemed impossible. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Malik approaching with his parents. "Malik, this is an adult conversation," Dr. Johnson began. "Mom, Mrs. Holloway taught us that adult problems affect kids the most, so kids should have a voice in adult solutions." He looked at Mrs. Holloway seriously. "If you take this job, you could help teachers all over the state learn what you learned. You could make sure kids like me and Marcus and Jenny don't have to wonder if their teachers see their potential." Mrs. Holloway knelt down to Malik's eye level. "That's a big responsibility, Malik. What if I'm not ready for it?" "Mrs. Holloway, do you remember what you told our class on your last day? You said that we don't get ready for important work by waiting until we feel qualified. We get ready by doing the work, even when it scares us." She smiled, remembering that conversation. "You were listening." "I'm always listening. That's what you taught me, that my thoughts and ideas matter enough to be heard." Mrs. Holloway stood up and faced Dr. Johnson. "I'll accept the position on one condition." "What's that?" "I want Malik, Marcus, and Jenny to serve as student advisors to the program. Not as tokens, but as genuine consultants who help design training materials and evaluate their effectiveness." Dr. Johnson looked surprised. "That's highly unusual. These are elementary school children. These are the experts on what it feels like to be underestimated and what it means to be truly seen. Who better to guide us?" Malik beamed. "You really want us to help?" "Malik, you've been my teacher throughout this entire process. It's time to make that official." As families began to leave, Mrs. Holloway found herself standing in the now quiet lobby with the 3 students who had changed her life. "You know," she said, "when this all started, I thought I was the teacher and you were the students. But it turned out to be the other way around." Jenny Martinez spoke up. "Maybe that's what good teaching really is, everyone learning from everyone else." Marcus nodded. "My mom always says that the best teachers are the ones who never stop being students." Malik had the final word, as he so often did. "Mrs. Holloway, you know what I think? I think you were always meant to be this person, someone who helps teachers see all their students clearly. You just needed to learn how to see yourself clearly first." 1 year later, Mrs. Holloway stood before a packed auditorium at the State Education Conference, delivering the keynote address on From Bias to Brilliance, Transforming Educational Equity. In the front row sat Dr. Johnson, now serving as her deputy director, and beside her, Malik, Marcus, and Jenny, the youngest presenters in the conference's history. "Education," Mrs. Holloway said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is not about confirming what we think we already know about our students. It's about discovering what we never imagined they could become." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of Malik's original essay, the one she had failed with such devastating certainty. "This essay changed my life, not because of what it said, but because of what I almost prevented it from saying. How many brilliant voices have we silenced with our assumptions? How many futures have we limited with our biases? How many children have we taught to doubt their own potential because we couldn't see it? The auditorium was completely silent, hundreds of educators hanging on every word. But here's what I've learned over the past year. It's never too late to see clearly. It's never too late to choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience, justice over the status quo. She gestured to Malik, Marcus, and Jenny. These three young people didn't just survive my bias, they transcended it. They chose to help me become better rather than simply write me off as hopeless. They showed me that wisdom isn't limited by age, that forgiveness is more powerful than anger, and that real change happens when we're brave enough to let our students teach us. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Later, as they packed up their materials, Malik approached Mrs. Holloway with a folder in his hands. "Mrs. Holloway, I have something for you." Inside the folder was a new essay, beautifully handwritten. The title read, "My Teacher's Journey, How Learning to See Changed Everything." "Malik, this is beautiful, but you didn't need to." "Actually, I did need to," he interrupted gently. "See, you taught me that our stories matter. Your story, the whole story, including the mistakes and the learning and the growing, matters too. Other teachers need to hear it. Other kids need to know that change is possible." Mrs. Holloway read the essay through tears. Malik had captured not just the facts of what had happened, but the deeper truth of transformation, how facing our worst selves can lead to becoming our best selves. "You know what this means, don't you?" she asked him. "What?" "You're going to be a writer. A real writer. Someone who tells the stories that need to be told." Malik grinned. "Mrs. Holloway, I've been a real writer all along. You just needed to learn how to see it." As they walked out of the conference center together, the former teacher and her students who became her teachers, Mrs. Holloway reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with failure, with the worst kind of educational malpractice born of unconscious bias and unexamined assumptions. But it had transformed into something beautiful, a program that was changing lives across the state, ensuring that thousands of children would be seen, valued, and nurtured for their unique gifts. The racist teacher who had failed the black student was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true education begins with the humility to learn, the courage to change, and the wisdom to recognize that every child, every single child, deserves to have their brilliance discovered and celebrated. And in the end, that recognition didn't just change Mrs. Holloway's life, or even just Malik's life. It changed the entire system, one teacher, one student, one moment of genuine seeing at a time. Love had won. Not romantic love, but something deeper and more transformative. The love that recognizes the inherent worth and unlimited potential in every human being, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. It was love at last, and it was exactly what the world needed.